Hey, good afternoon, Black Hawk Brigade. This is Colonel Morgado, your Brigade Commander, with our third installment within our Leader Professional Development series. Today's topic, or this month's topic, is training and education philosophy. So, why might you ask, am I taking the time to lay out a training and education philosophy where that is our bread and butter? It's what we do on a daily basis. Well, quite frankly, certainly within my time within the command, and certainly over a 2-year period, our command's experienced a great deal of turmoil and change and a lot of new directions in terms of where we're taking the command in terms of leader development. So my job today, and what I hope to do, is provide some clarity for that. So my overall purpose is first to provide some context and maybe a means to understand what we're doing in a very common sense way of what our end product, what our end result needs to be, and a way to help visualize that doctrine. Now, everything I'm about to tell you is not going to supersede what's in our Cadet Command Leader Development or Cadet Character and Leader Development Strategy, or within the series of ADP, ADRP, and FM 6-22 in terms of leader development. But I want to give you kind of at least my combat arms officer, guy with 22 years of Army experience perspective about what we're doing in terms of leader development. And second, I want to set that point of departure for future conversations. Because as you know, after everyone's had a chance to look at this LPD, we'll get together in a phone con, talk about this as a command, and then I will visit each and every one of our programs over the course of the year. We can continue the conversation there. So, where am I going, right? I guess first and foremost, while wearing my 3rd Brigade Commander hat as part of Cadet Command, I'm wearing that hat now, I'm playing that role, and I have to say that obviously what we do using ASALT, using our ADM models, all of our doctrine, our CCLIDs, our 21st century soldier competencies, all those things are important. But when I put my other hat on, as a CAV trooper, as a former battalion commander, as a commander of multiple organizations, all that really doesn't make a difference if I get a lieutenant that arrives who's not capable, who's not competent, and able to be a leader. So ultimately, if I take this hat back off, we're going to use the principles, obviously within our doctrine to develop leaders, but when the rubber meets the road, what kind of leader do we want showing up to our organizations? Because certainly we are in the 4th generation model, but what are we doing to help out those units that are going to receive our lieutenants? So that's what I want to try and do today, is distill it to that level. This LPD will have 2 parts. So in the first part, I'm going to be very descriptive about what I'm giving you and trying to make those connections between doctrine and what we're doing physically within our classrooms and LTXs, or excuse me, FTXs, within our labs, and what we do over the summer, our summer period, cadet summer training. Part 2 is going to be a little more fluffy, for lack of a better term, and I'm going to talk about maybe some ways, some hows, and to help generate some thought. Going to be not conclusive in terms of answers, but at least help prompt that thought. So that's where we're at. So 2 parts, please keep that in mind, and I'll give you the big clue about when that's going to happen. So first, I want to begin with, in a very armor officer and basic way, is about the 1, 2, 3s of leader development. So my argument is there are 4 components that we need, or that we're trying to get at within the development of our future leaders. And so, as you can see, in pure armor fashion, I got things out of order. It's 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to take it all the way to infinity. And what my argument is, these are the things that we need to be concerned about as we go forward. So I'll begin with 1, right? I'll start at the beginning. So I have to begin with a story. So as a young lieutenant, and I have to confess that I was not a very good lieutenant. I'll just be very upfront with that. But on one occasion, I approached my battalion commander just before an operation was about to begin, and I asked him the question, so sir, where should I be for this operation? So my battalion commander was not, caring, loving man, and probably rightfully so, but he looked at me and he had the ability to kind of arch his eyebrow. So he looked at me, he arched his eyebrow, he looked at me, he said, Andy, you're an idiot, right? So here I was, brand new lieutenant. I'm like, damn, I've only been a lieutenant for 2 months and I've already been called an idiot, right? So I looked at him kind of with an open stare, and he looked at me, I looked at him, and some time went by. I said, well, sir, I'm no better enlightened now than I was 5 seconds ago, so can you help me out? And he said, well, Andy, there's only one place that you should always be, and you need to know what that is. So again, I said, hey, I'm not sure what you tell me, and I'm not as bright. So he said, Andy, a lieutenant's position always should be at the point of danger, or a leader's position should always be at the point of danger. So I thought about that, and try to figure out what he meant by that. So as I thought about it, I think the point of danger is where I can make the most difference, right? A leader needs to position his or herself where you can make the most difference. And we talk about this as presence. Now, since I'm being very inarticulate, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a quick movie clip to help us articulate or help us express or give us an image about what presence actually means, and we'll come back and talk about it. Thanks. Okay, so what was going on in that clip? Obviously, you represented a fictional character, Captain John Miller, right? A fictional character, but represented actions by U.S. soldiers on Omaha Beach on D-Day, June 6, 1944. So in that very short clip, we saw an awful lot going on. We saw, obviously, soldiers looking for the leader to take action. We saw probably the most intense and difficult position a leader can find his or herself in. We found an officer interacting with his non-commissioned officer. We found a leader, even under the most terrible circumstance, be able to convey a why to the people that he or she led, and personal example to get or compel action or generate movement towards mission accomplishment. My argument is that that's what we're trying to do with each and every officer that we're producing. We are trying to produce John Millers. Now, I know what you may be thinking, right? We're not going to produce all infantry officers. We produce for every basic branch in the Army and then some. But whether you're a cyber officer, an MI officer, infantry, armor, MI, nurse, doctor, dentist, regardless, you are part, or we are creating officers who will participate in a very unique profession, that of an Army officer. And they're going to be faced constantly with challenges that may not exhibit everyone as Omaha Beach, but will be challenging nonetheless, because our job, our fundamental purpose as an Army is to go and defeat and destroy the enemies of our nation. So a very unique profession, and we are trying to build John Millers. So why is presence important? Presence is absolutely important to convey a sense of confidence and to establish a person as a leader. It doesn't always come easy. Clearly, by my dumb questions of my battalion commander wondering where I should be, he clearly tried to convey to me that presence is being at the point of danger where you can make the most difference. Not always instinctual, not always extremely clear-cut about what that is, but that's fundamental to what we have to do as cadre members as we develop future leaders. So point of danger. Second, beginning at number 2, is really about culture, right? And I won't say anything more than that. What I want you to do I'm going to let Mr. Simon Sinek, from the author of Leaders Eat Last, among others, convey to you at least a portion of that idea and what he does with Captain William Swanson. So watch the clip and we'll come back.
There's a man by the name of Captain William Swanson who recently was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions on September 8th, 2009. On that day, a column of American and Afghan troops were making their way through a part of Afghanistan to help protect a group of government officials, a group of Afghan government officials who'd be meeting with some local village elders. The column came under ambush and was surrounded on 3 sides. And amongst many other things, Captain Swanson was recognized for running into live fire to rescue the wounded and pull out the dead. One of the people he rescued was a sergeant, and he and a comrade were making their way to a medevac helicopter. And what was remarkable about this day is, by sheer coincidence, one of the medevac medics happened to have a GoPro camera on his helmet and captured the whole scene on camera. It shows Captain Swanson and his comrade bringing this wounded soldier who'd received a gunshot to the neck. They put him in the helicopter, and then you see Captain Swanson bend over and give him a kiss before he turns around to rescue more. I saw this, and I thought to myself, where do people like that come from? What is that? That is some deep, deep emotion when you would want to do that. There's a love there. And I want to know, why is it that I don't have people that I work with like that? You know, in the military, they give medals to people who are willing to sacrifice themselves so that others may gain. In business, we give bonuses to people who are willing to sacrifice others so that we may gain. Yeah, right? So I asked myself, where do people like this come from? And my initial conclusion was that they're just better people. That's why they're attracted to the military. These better people are attracted to this concept of service. But that's completely wrong. What I learned is that it's the environment. And if you get the environment right, every single one of us has the capacity to do these remarkable things. And more importantly, others have that capacity too. I've had the great honor of getting to meet some of these who we would call heroes, who've put themselves and put their lives at risk to save others. And I asked them, why would you do it? Why did you do it? And they all say the same thing: because they would have done it for me. It's this deep sense of trust and cooperation. So trust and cooperation are really important here. The problem with concepts of trust and cooperation is that they are feelings, they're not instructions. I can't simply say to you, trust me, and you will. I can't simply instruct 2 people to cooperate, and they will. It's not how it works. It's a feeling. So where does that feeling come from?
All right, so Simon Sinek really conveyed a story there about a deep relationship between Captain William Swanson and the soldiers that he led. So my 2 isn't really 2, but I call it my 1-in-1, right? I call it the relationship between the leader and the led, and what I call the soul of leadership. So what Simon Sinek had tried to convey there was that it wasn't our military, our army, or even successful organizations, isn't that great people get together and make an organization. It's really about creating an organization and setting a culture or condition for future success. So we as a military, and I know you use the military example, is we bring folks in off the street who have some propensity to serve or to be a part of our army, and we transform them, right, through our culture, right? And we, as cadre members within Cadet Command, are not only bringing in civilians, for lack of a better term, and making them soldiers. We're going 1 step further. We are not only making them soldiers, we're making them leaders of soldiers, and that requires a special trust, confidence, and responsibility that's not found in many other places. So how we build a culture, or how we introduce our cadets to culture, is absolutely essential. That they have to understand what their relationship, what their powers, what their responsibilities are as leaders. So they have to understand it. That is why we have to imbue our cadets with that sense of culture. So presence first, then culture. And understanding that they understand the power of that soul of leadership between the leader and the led. So, point number 3, let's talk about attributes and competencies, because my argument is that there are 3 specific skills or competencies and 1 specific attribute that kind of form the core of who we are as leaders. Whether you're a sergeant, second lieutenant, all the way to 4-star general or command sergeant major or sergeant major of the Army, these 3+1, what I call 3+1, forms our core, our center, and our nucleus. As we go up from sergeant to staff sergeant, or from lieutenant to captain or major, these 3+1 remains at its core, and we add subsequent levels of competencies and attributes that are required to succeed at the next level. But always at the heart is this 3+1. So what's the first competency that is important to them? And I say that it's about making decisions. Ultimately, we as leaders earn our paycheck about the decisions that we make. Because making decisions is about taking responsibility for a particular action. Of being for good or for ill, whether your unit succeeds or fails, is incumbent upon you as a leader, and that's about making decisions or committing to a course of action. Certainly as a battalion commander, one of the biggest landmines I saw my lieutenants step on was that they abdicated responsibility. And the people that they normally abdicated responsibility to was their platoon sergeant or some other NCO in the chain that distanced themselves from taking full responsibility about their actions. That's absolutely critical as a leader to do that. Second is taking the initiative. Okay, there's a lot of also obstacles for individuals to take the initiative, right? I mean, let's first, I guess, start with what initiative is. Initiative, in simplest terms, is encountering a situation, understanding that something's not right or an action needs to be taken, and just doing it without waiting for further guidance or specific instructions. That's what taking initiative is. It is a prized quantity. So again, as a young lieutenant, and again, I was not a very good lieutenant, I remember sitting in my office one day not too really sure about what I needed to be doing at the time. I stumble upon our additional duty roster. I look at the additional duty roster and it says Lieutenant Morgado, Venereal Disease Prevention Officer, right? So I'm like, wow, I bet you here within the Republic of Korea, where I was assigned, I bet you this is a real important job and I need to get working on that right away. So I moved out with a vengeance, right? Typing out a policy letter for my commander, writing our SOP, and I was just a whirlwind within our typewriter, within our order room, getting this done. I was so proud of myself when I had it done. I walk into the company commander's office, I lay out on this table, and I'm like, sir, we're going to have the best venereal disease prevention program in all of 8th Army. All you got to do is sign these documents. So Captain Hall, being a smart, level-headed man that he was, he picked it up, he looked at it, he looked at me, and he said, Andy, you're an idiot, right? So here I was, a lieutenant for about 8 months, and I've already been called an idiot twice by my superior officers. Right? Probably not a good track record for a lieutenant, right? So he said, Andy, you're an idiot, and he followed it by saying, you got gunnery coming up in 3 weeks. Why don't you focus your energies on getting your platoon ready to qualify, then you can worry about being the best venereal disease prevention program in all of 8th Army. So I grabbed those paperwork and I shuffled out with my tail between my legs, and I was gone, right? So I probably got an A for initiative, but an F, right, for about what I was taking the initiative on, right? But absolutely, that quality within the lieutenant is absolutely pride. You got to be able to take the initiative. Final the final skill or competency that we need, and I argue, is communication. Right? You have to be able to communicate as an officer, verbally, in writing. You have to be able to convey your ideas, because you can make the best decisions, you can know how to take the initiative, but if you can't communicate what you want or how things need to be done, you're going to fail as a leader. You will not be able to generate action. So communicate is essential. And finally, my +1, that one attribute that I think is the lubricant, the go juice, if you will, that makes all these work, is courage. I think it's clear to see how an individual is going to need courage to make sound decisions, to take the initiative, and to communicate. So a fine example, or an example that I like to use, you can tell me whether it's fine or not, an example I like to use about how courage comes into play is with the idea of communicating. So we as leaders, or our leaders, are frequently going to have to make unpopular decisions or tell people to do things that they're not going to want to do. So an example I like to use is that I remember as a tank platoon leader that invariably track, or brand new track, arrived for your tank at 16:30 on a Friday. So what are our soldiers and even platoon leaders thinking about at 16:30 on a Friday? It's beer 30 time, right? It's time to get back home and enjoy our weekend. But you know that as a leader, when that track arrives, you got to get it on your tank in order to bring your tank up from a non-mission capable status. So you as a leader have to convey that to your troopers, right? Because you know it's going to take your 15 soldiers plus yourself about 6 hours, right? To take old track off the tank, band it or break it up into 7 block sections, band it, put it on pallets, get it turned in, take the new track, that comes in 9 block sections. I don't know why it comes in 9 block sections and we have to turn it in 7. Take those 9 block sections, make 2 64 block sections, get it on your tank, torque up all the boats, take it on a 3 mile check ride or a road test, bring it back, retorque all the bolts, and it's going to take you 6 hours to do all that. So not only do you have to tell your troopers who have no interest in doing that on a Friday afternoon at 16:30, it can easily wait until Monday. You not only have to tell your troopers that, you got to go outside the gate, because who's waiting out there are all their loved ones that are waiting to get their loved ones back home with them. And you got to tell all of them, hey, put your dinner in the microwave, you're not going to be home until about 2300 last night. That takes courage. And that's probably just a small example of just how unpopular sometimes our decisions and being able to be a leader and communicate effectively can be. So my 3+1. And what these are, again, are competencies, and attributes. Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3. Now to get to the infinity part, right? So the one constant factor, no matter what we do within our classrooms, we are constantly evaluating for character, right? And character is what I call our infinity piece. Character. So there's probably been volumes and volumes written and discussed about character and what it means, and sometimes it's difficult to come to a definition and properly assess it. It's one of those things that when we see it, we feel it, we know what it is, but it can be frequently hard to define or to put our finger on it as we're trying to assess it in some way. So I always use this example. In my mind, and we'll use this for the sake of argument, character is what our leaders will rely on in the absence of any clear direction or guidance, right? When they're faced with a problem that they can't or have no experience or knowledge in terms of how to solve, it's what they're going to revert to or revert back to try and sort out or come to a solid, comprehensive decision. So how I like to get at that and determine what is perhaps at the center of someone's character is I ask folks to stop and for 60 seconds, think about it and write down the one word that defines you, right? And in the exercise of doing this, we find that there's some challenges to it, right? Some folks find it really easy, but not many. They're easy, they write one word down and that's it. But a lot of folks really struggle with, okay, this idea of, okay, what's that one word that defines me? Because the argument is, well, there are many words that define me. But if you boil it all down, what is that single driving factor or word that exists that we're going to rely on when things go bad? That's character. Part of our job, or a critical component of our job, is plumbing for that word. Let's test, we have to test our cadets, we have to test our leaders to see what that word is. If it's an inappropriate word like ego, or self-centered, or self-motivated, or selfish, we've got to replace those words with something else, right? We have to replace it with honor, or integrity, or a word that's going to make it, to make them a leader of character, able to lead folks through difficult times. So I guess in sum, here are the 4 areas that kind of where our doctrine, everything we do within the classrooms comes together. Presence, we have to instill presence within our leaders. We have to do them with our culture and understand where they fit in as commissioned officers. We have to test the critical core components of competencies and attributes. And finally, you've got to be able to study and analyze their character. That's the end of part 1, right? And probably the most descriptive portion. We're about to transition to part 2. All right, we're back for part 2 of this LPD, and if you're still with us, You're truly a saint if you're able to withstand my ramblings on of part one, but here's part two. So if you thought part one was a little bit disjointed, boy, I'm really going to throw you for a loop for part two, because my intent for part two is first, address, I think, some kind of loose ends within our curriculum, which I think aren't too clear about how we expect you to use them as leaders, and then hopefully maybe provide you some tools. In this section, I'm definitely going to give you some things that will maybe give you some food for thought of maybe ways that you can approach things within your classroom or during FTXs. So everything that we do within our classroom, regardless of what the topic is focused on these four, right? Hopefully this next section will give you maybe some techniques about how we can actually do that. But I want to take care of some loose ends first. So the first loose end deals with our idea of complexity within Cadet Command. So the Army operating concept is winning in a complex world, paraphrasing its title, right? So we are very big in trying to understand complexity and how we as an Army can succeed in complexity. And so the way this is filtered down to Cadet Command is, we put things in terms of complexity of, weapons of mass destruction, or how to deal with Russia and the Ukraine, to, how do we deal with China in the South China Sea. And in my mind, those are echelons above where our lieutenants or officer candidates' mind should be, right? So I think our idea, or how we address complexity, we've got to bring it down to a level that they understand. Certainly our lieutenants have to have some sort of familiarity with complexity, but not currently in the way that our curriculum is really getting at it. In my opinion, certainly I welcome any feedback on that. I don't want to get too deeply involved in complexity, but just give you a quick tool, and you, by all means, please go research this, and you can dig up some more information on it. But a tool that I've used to help understand complexity just a little bit better, and what we're to do about it, more importantly, what we're to do about it, is the Kinefin model, right? A gentleman by the name of Alexander is one of the prime authors or drivers of the Kinefin model. He pretty much has established his quadrant, right, of four ways or four quadrants to deal with problems and how to define them. Things on the right side of the quadrant, simple and complicated, are those things that have a clear causation, or we can determine causation in some way. Things on the left side, complexity, and chaos, are those which there is no direct causation, or causation is difficult to divine. So starting in the bottom right quadrant, and what I really want to harp on are the strategies that Alexander recommends to deal with each type of problem. So first, a simple problem, right? He says the way to deal with simple problems, and simple problems are defined as, again, causation is known. They are normally self-evident solutions. It requires a manner of sensing the problem correctly, identifying it with a known solution set, and then implementing it. So he says it's sense, categorize, respond, right? Perceive the problem, perceive something is wrong, put it into a category that we're familiar with. Okay, yeah, I've sort of dealt with this problem before, and then implement a solution. In green is what I have as the tools that the Army has proposed to deal with a simple problem. Easily, troop leading procedures are put into place for us to solve simple problems. And we put that into cadets beginning in their MS1 year, as we teach them TLPs and we try to have them, with repetition, take care of simple problems. Next is complicated problems, right? So complicated problems also have a cause, right? We can get at causation, but just upon their size or breadth or the number of moving pieces in it, it can sometimes be hard to divine what that particular cause is, right? So what Alexander proposes is that we sense, we analyze, meaning that we have to apply some deliberate thought, right, to help solve the problem, and then implement a solution to it. We're going to respond to the problem. Army says that MDMP is normally the approved solution. And in many programs, perhaps as early as your junior year, they're introduced to it, but definitely in the senior year, we're talking to cadets about the military decision-making process or the Army problem-solving methodology, right? Then we get to the idea of complexity, right? A complex problem. And again, this side of the quadrant is we're not clear on what causation is, right? The Army says it's the Army design methodology is a way to deal with complex problems. Well, ADM is not introduced within any sort of professional military education curriculum until CGSC, right? Command General Staff College, within the 9th or 10th year of service, right? So there's a big gap between senior year of college, right? And then being introduced to this idea of complexity. So I think our idea is not to bring our curriculum from Command General Staff College down to our senior year. but it's to stay focused on simple and complicated problems and introduce our cadets to how to solve complex problems when it's not immediately self-evident of what the cause is to problems to help define a solution. So the key is, I think the thing we need to focus on is what Alexander says is our approach to complex problems. He says we first probe, meaning take some action to help test a system, sense to see what happens, then respond to it, and then try it all over again in a cyclical fashion until we get a better understanding and perhaps move a complex problem into a complicated problem. I know it's a lot, and probably a lot to digest, but I encourage you to go and look at the Kinefin model and talk about and think about how some of those solutions or how some of those methodologies might help. But the whole idea behind all this is that in our educational process of how we challenge our cadets on these 4 areas, we can create educational opportunities where they can think about complexity. I'm not going to spend another moment on it, but check that out, please. All right. Last bit of part 2, and we'll move quickly through here. Again, these are going to be more kind of brain teasers and force you maybe do a little bit of homework, but here's just a little bit about, I think, some how or solutions that we can get at. I'm very curious to know from our CFTC graduates, our cadre and faculty development course graduates, of how this ties in to what you're learning there, and please help broaden our discussion when we do sit down and talk about it. So some ways, some hows, right? Thinking about Dr. Kahneman, who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talks about 2 types of thinking, our brains are configured with 2 types of systems that operate in parallel with one another. System 1 is our instinctive or intuitive thinking, right? So that means that our brain, when it encounters a problem, it immediately wants to find an answer to it based upon something it has experienced before, right? It wants a quick answer in order to make sense of something and answer something, right? To be fully in touch and operate within our world. When our type 1 or system 1 thinking can't get at a solution, it triggers system 2, which is a more deliberate and rational thinking. This is exactly what we're trying to do within the education and development of our cadets, right? We're trying to teach instinct to them in terms of battle drills and response, being able to come up quickly with solutions and put them into effect. But we also want them to think about deliberately about problems. So I would say that reading Thinking Fast and Slow, definitely worth your while as you think about how our cadets are processing information and how we can develop each one of those systems, because they're both going to function and operate. Next, another loose end, right? In terms of what Bloom's taxonomy means to us. We hear a lot about Bloom's taxonomy and what it means. I have reversed the pyramid. Down here are the lower order type thinking, and down on the bottom are the higher order type thinking. In order to get at lower order thinking, we use lecture, demonstration, and debate, right? Some pretty much we transmit, our students receive. We want to limit the amount of work we do here and really work at the upper level of Bloom's taxonomy, right? We want the cadets to make connections, make judgments, create knowledge. And how we do that are films, case studies, and problem solving, right? But the key, the number 1 takeaway I want you to take from this and think about how we apply it in our classroom is we are creating conditions that we want our cadets to fail. The only way that we're going to plumb or check or certify things like culture or whether they got the 3+1 or presence or character is that we push them to the edge of failure, then beyond. That's what this idea is, right? And that's how we're going to get them there, is that we have to be able to get to more depth and push them to failure, have them learn, and get back again. Last loose end, right? It's called the OODA loop, right? It's infrequently used within the adult learning model. I know that the ASALT methods are heavily influenced Mr. Don Vandergrift, who spent a lot of time conveying the OODA loop, first created, wow, I'm drawing a blank, Boyd, Colonel John Boyd from the Air Force first developed the OODA loop model for essentially Air Force fighter pilots, right? It's been adopted by Mr. Vandergrift to think about how we can improve decision making within our cadets or within our officer corps, and he uses as the center. So we have to create environments where we force a cadet to observe, in order to orient, in order to make a decision and implement that decision and put it into effect. That's what the OODA loop is about. Again, just a way to think about how we can get at what I call those 4 major functions, 1, 2, 3 to infinity, right? So think about how we can create training programs and stressful occasions for our cadets. All right, that was part 2, and my 30 minutes are about up. Again, this has helped just inspire a thought. So what's the so what of all this? Certainly, we want to get at experiential learning. I want you to make sure that we come away with this idea of presence, culture, skills, attributes, and character. 1, 2, 3 to infinity. In terms of, if you boil it all down, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Try to hit very quickly on why complexity matters and where you should be at within your programs, and then really encourage you to think about those last 3 things I talked about very briefly, and think about maybe a method that works of how we can implement it within our classrooms. All right, that was down and dirty. I look forward to the conversations that we'll have, and look forward to seeing you on campus. Thanks.